17. I fell through the chasm, green and gray, passing by me as I continued to fall. I recovered from the paralysis quickly enough to pull out Talonthorn and ram it in the wall, humming to keep it from breaking apart. I stopped almost immediately, hanging by the sword handle. And that's when I realized that I was floating. There was no gravity down here. I thought, what then? What was the point of throwing me down here? The sire shall fall. Unless this wasn't the end. I pulled Talonthorn out of the wall and kicked off of it a moment before the seer, whatever his name was, slammed into the rock where I had landed. I hit the far wall and managed to maneuver enough to kick off to avoid where he had shot off to follow after me. While passing in the air, I tried to hit him with Talonthorn, but he managed to block it with one of his gauntlets, blocked it with his forearm, and it tore his robes enough that I could see that his gauntlets went all the way down to his elbow, possibly further. So he had protection of some kind. I landed against the far wall and managed to stabilize myself as he kicked off to follow me. And we're just going back and forth across this chamber with endless green and gray descending below us. It didn't descend into darkness because the green was glowing, but I couldn't see how far down it went. It just went on forever. And by this point we drifted down fairly far below the original, like the hole where we'd come through. And as he shot after me, I hadn't kicked off in the right way, and I couldn't maneuver myself in the air to try to face him. And I instinctively reached out to Destiny to try to twist myself in the air or push me further forward or something. But as I reached out for Destiny, there was a crackle of electricity and a bolt of, not lightning, but of electricity arced between the two of us and seared the both of us. And we both slammed into the wall. I managed to recover faster and kick away from him. I'm descending further down into this expanding chamber of green and gray. And I managed to catch myself, but the crystal that was growing here was sharp. Like, there were little spines of crystal, and so when I landed, it cut me, and I managed to pull away. Yeah, I pulled away, and it left drops of red hovering in the air, and I got out of the way as the Firusinayafotheyava, whatever his name was, continued to drift, still recovering from the shock that we'd both received, and he slammed into the same place as I took the opportunity of him being, I took opportunity of the shock to try to get away. I threw myself down below and kicked myself off into an overhang as it branched out into different chambers and different tunnels going every which way, but still always descending downward. I came out of sight and tried to focus. Okay, I need to beat him. The prophecy says one of us will die, at least so far as I could understand it. And at the very least, I just needed to stay away from this guy because he was dangerous. As I took a little bit of a breather, I took a moment to recognize how beautiful this place was. Yes, I was absolutely sick of green, but it was beautiful. The crystals growing all throughout this rock, and veins and whole chambers made of crystal, and it was beautiful. And as I listened, I could hear a rhythmic thrumming sound, like the breathing of the world, or the beating of its heart down here. And experimentally, I tried to sire again, see if I was far enough away to get some kind of hold on destiny. And I tried to focus on him, and as I opened my mind to him, again, there was a crackling of electricity, and I didn't close myself off in time, and an arc of electricity leapt between me and Firus, we'll call him Firus, who had just come around the bend. It caught both of us and seared his robes. And I could see where it blackened his skin underneath, and I'm sure that it did wonders on me too. The crystals weren't really reflective, so I couldn't see myself, but it hurt, that was for sure. And he roared, and as he pushed himself off towards me, he tore a chunk of crystal off in his hand and hurled it across the chamber at me. And I managed to pull myself out of the way. When it hit the back wall, it shattered, and splinters of crystal began to fill the air. And I realized, there was not much that I could do to stop this. And that's when I thought, idiot, you're a traveler. What are you doing? You're not just a seer. You can do these other things. And as I flew through the air, I reached out to Veodicia to travel to it. And the moment I began to overlap the worlds, I slammed into something midair. And it caught me off guard. Kind of took the air out of my lungs. And I heard Firus chuckling, and I realized we were underground. And so if I traveled to Veodicia, I'd be traveling underground. And there weren't chasms like this in there. I thought, oh no, shoot! And he hurled another ball of crystal at me. But then I realized if it were physical enough that I could stop midair, was it physical enough that I could stop other things? And I focused in front of me as the hunk of crystal came towards me. I opened a gate in front of me, and the ball shattered against it. And I was able to block it that way. And I thought, okay, I can still get ahead on this. I kept the wall up and kicked against it to get against a wall and get to where I was trying to go, and shot myself along the walls as Firus was doing the same kind of things. I could feel another burst of electricity as I realized that he was trying to summon destiny as well. And I held up Talonthorn in front of me. I know, big help. But I realized magical metal sword. So I held it in front of me, and as the bolt came, I hummed into Talonthorn, and it completely absorbed the shock and scarred Firus across the face as he got hit by this bolt, and he screamed in rage again and hurled another chunk of crystal at me as he started coming towards me, batting away pieces of crystal with his gauntlets. I was not going to try picking up pieces of crystal unless I had that kind of protection too, because these things could be sharp. And I opened up another portal in front of me, but the crystal glanced off the side of it and hit my shoulder and scraped me up. It didn't take a chunk out, but it scraped me up pretty bad. And I thought, what? And looking into Vedici, I realized there were little gaps in the stone, not nearly as big as this one, but there were gaps. And I thought, okay, I can use those. I maneuvered myself so that I could travel into the gap and went through to complete darkness. I fell on my back. The whole orientation completely threw me off. But I fell on my back, and there wasn't a lot of oxygen, but I was able to breathe. This was a small pocket, but I was able to get a little bit of a breather. And from here I could sense destiny. And he was cheering me on. He said, don't let Firusinayafotheyava turn this over to his side. Let the prophecy be about you. And I said, what do you mean? Aren't you destiny? What you want happens. What you want happens. And he says, that should be the case, but with travelers, no. And with everything that the Prophethian's done, it's all on its head. There's no guarantee that you're going to be the one to make it out of this. I want you to be. But you need to keep fighting. You can do this. I nodded and steeled myself. And got ready. And traveled back into the world of darkness so I could breathe again. And Firusinai, whatever his name was, had drifted over to where I was, and he was ready to catch me. And he reached out to grab me with his gauntlets. And I was ready for it. As he grabbed me, I hummed Talonthorn, or hummed to Featherlife's tone, giving me the same abilities as the gauntlets. And so it paralyzed him in turn, and I let us drift close enough to where I was able to take us back into Vedicia. And we both slammed into the ground, and I reached out with my mind, because I couldn't move my body, but my mind still worked. And I reached out and pulled myself back into the world of darkness, leaving him there. And it took me a minute to free up, and I caught myself against the wall that I drifted against. And took a minute to calm down in the darkness, and moved myself away from where shards of crystal were drifting in the air. A few had been cutting me here and there. Nothing too bad, but still not good. I was losing drops of blood here and there, and I couldn't do that. But he was gone. I said, all right. There's something for me to find. And from where I was here, the thrumming sound that I'd noticed before was a lot louder. And I pulled myself out of this chamber and went along a tunnel, listening to where this thing got louder, and I thought, what is this thing? And I sired to try to see if I could tell anything about it. And an arc of electricity caught me in the back. And as I recovered from the burning pain, with the other burns still on me as well, I looked up to see Firus coming around the corner, and he was sweating. There was black-blue blood dripping from, beading from his body, and his robes were gone. He had a white wrap around him, and his white plated gauntlets were completely exposed. And he roared and came at me again. I thought, how did he get out? He's not a traveler. But as I felt out at him, I felt a hint of an ability, and I remembered Scar having said that everyone has creativity and adventurousness. For some, it's enough to naturally travel, and I guess for him, he managed it in a pinch, which is kind of terrifying. And I threw myself away frantically, while still keeping an eye on Veodicia, I felt another chamber, a larger one, and traveled through, and immediately began to fall. And I caught myself along the wall here. Realized that this thing plummeted downward. I thought, oh shoot, the orientation just was so strange. But I held myself on the wall and waited until Firusinayafotheyava drifted past, keeping an eye on the world of darkness. And I let myself down to where I was behind him before traveling back to the world of darkness and slashing him with Talon Thorn. I managed to cut him across the back, and he roared in pain and tried to catch me with his gauntlets again. But I sent myself back into Veodicia and clung to the wall. And as I surveyed the situation, looking into the world of darkness for Veodicia, I saw another chamber. That's hard to explain. So there was this space that I was in, and in the world of darkness there was the main chamber we were in, and there was a smaller chamber that was cut off by a wall of crystal, and I realized I could get through from here. So I let go of the wall and dropped until I was on the far side of the crystal wall in the world of darkness and traveled back, orienting myself such that I was able to catch myself against the far wall without doing too much damage. And from here, the thrumming filled my ears. It sounded almost mechanical. And I sat here, taking a breather. This chamber was almost all green crystal, and glowing fiercely green. And as I sat taking a breather, Firus broke through the crystal wall, blood streaming from his face as he shattered this crystal, and he was close enough that he pushed through with his gloves and slammed my chest with his gauntlets and slammed me into the back wall and screamed in my face and pulled me up and threw me across the room. I wasn't able to recover my movement in time to catch myself and slammed into the back wall and felt a spear of crystal stab through my abdomen. As I hit the back wall, my head broke through fast enough that it slammed straight through the wall, and my vision went black as my head went through the wall, and I saw this piece of crystal sticking through me, and watched as Firusinayafotheyava wiped blood from his face and turned and pushed off to come at me. And in that moment, hanging on this crystal, I went completely numb, and all I could think was a life required. And the rest of the words started to come after that. When seer versus seer, the seer that sired to kill shall fall. I realized I had to do this. Without destiny, what exactly I didn't know, but I cut myself off from destiny. Let him have it. As I did, I became aware of everything around me, no longer focusing on destiny. I felt the chamber around me, and I felt the thrumming louder in my ears than ever. And I realized, head broken through the wall, that I could see in another chamber a massive machine with tubes grabbing onto the crystal. This Prophithian machine that was pumping something of some kind. And all I knew was it didn't belong here. And I gathered enough movement to move my hand, which had broken through as well. It was still holding on to Talon Thorn because it had been paralyzed closed. I threw my hand backward, releasing Talon Thorn into the air. And it spun through the air as made his way through the air at me, and Talonthorn lodged itself in the machine, which cut off and sputtered and began to grind, and fell silent. And as it cut off, gravity seemed to return to the chamber, and Firusinayafotheyava, who'd been coming straight at me, began to drift upwards up through, like, above my head, and he curved in the air and slammed through the crystal ceiling above my head, or so I felt it to be. But he slammed straight through it and fell into the chasm, into the cavern below, and tried to catch himself, but slammed through the crystal wall on that side, and began to tumble down the caverns, his cries falling silent like the thrumming of the machine. As the gravity... Firusinayafotheyava was gone. End of chapter 17.